Good evening, everybody. I don't know, can you all hear me? I hope. Um, I am Daniel Stetson, the Executive Director of the LSU Museum of Art, and very happy to have you here this evening for a special evening. I hope you can see on our screen, I tried to share some programs that are upcoming. We're going to wait just a few more minutes to make sure we get everybody here and into the program. So please just be a little patient with us. But you can see there's some drop-in demos that are happening and some workshops coming up in the Boneyard Show. We have Madeline Sneed-Grays is going to be doing a virtual artist talk. That is her self-portrait that's now in our collection. That comes up soon. That's from our collection Spotlight, Recent Acquisitions by Black Artists, that ends September 26th. And then it has a picture of the Form and Fire exhibition. And to take note is that both Form and Fire and the Boneyard exhibition have been extended to February 13th. We're very excited about that. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't say we also have a membership drive going on soon. If you're not a member, hope you'll join and support us. And there's also a lot going on for teachers in the classroom, and I hope you'll also pay attention to that. I gotta see if I can do this. I'm going to stop my share and just go back to a regular program. There we go. Let me, just I want you to know that there is closed captioning. The information will be found in the chat. So if you need closed captioning, please don't hesitate to partake of that. We appreciate that. During the course of this program, if you have questions that you would like answered or at least brought up later, we'll do the best we can. Please go ahead and put those in the chat box. We will be monitoring that and do our best to follow up with that. And it's always a lot of fun to see what people are thinking out there. I'm going to go ahead and introduce this program. First off, this is part of our Celebrate Clay program that is in consort with our two major ceramic exhibitions here at the museum. It is exciting to be part of this, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. We have had Kurt Weiser already has been a guest virtual speaker for this program. Lisa Orr came here and actually did live demonstrations for 2 days and a lecture about her work. And now we're in the third of this series with Garth Johnson. This program was really inspired because of our two exhibits. There is the Form and Fire exhibit, which is American Studio Ceramics from the E. John Bullard Collection. And Mr. Bullard is here with us tonight, watching and being part of this. He has been very, very generous to the museum, giving over 100 works of American Studio Ceramics from 1956 all the way to 2020. So we're talking about several decades, half a century nearly. It is a major gift and change for this museum, and it supports us in our community and campus educational functions. LSU is proud to have one of the top 10 ceramic departments in the country, and it is a very active place. Andy Shaw and Micheline Walsh, I think both are on here now. They are two of our faculty members in that department, and we're excited to have them involved. Andy, working with our staff, co-curated the Boneyard exhibition, which was really his idea as he was packing up the studio and getting ready to pack it up as they're building and renovating a new studio arts building for the whole School of Art. And that conversation started, and he, with Courtney Taylor and Grant Benoit, Courtney, our curator, Grant Benoit, our museum educator, put together the Boneyard Show, which is an exceptional project. In that, we have an actual studio that I showed earlier, some of the hands-on demonstrations and things that are coming up. That is a wonderful opportunity at this museum to have, where we have in the gallery people making clay, so you can see wet work and the actual making of clay. The Boneyard itself is bisque-fired works that were done mostly by visiting artists over the course of decades now, and several of them are actually in the exhibition of Form and Fire and in that collection. So you have wetware, bisque-fired ware, and then a major exhibition of finished work. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that our catalog is now out and published and available for purchase through our gift shop. It's a wonderful catalog that illustrates nearly everything in our collection. With some essays, and really what Garth's involvement is that we asked him, and we commissioned an essay for this catalog, and we're excited that scholarly work and very personal work is part of our project. Before I introduce Garth, I just want to say that Garth is the curator at the Everson Museum of Art in Syracuse, New York. And I want to say a little bit about what Syracuse means to me. I can tell you that my daughter is the 4th generation graduate of Syracuse University in my family, and she actually lives there and runs the Erie Canal Museum of History. Yeah, Garth. And then the Everson Museum was one of my earliest major hangout museums, in graduate school. And actually before that, I have a sister that lives there. She's lived there for a long, long time. And I've just always loved it. And seeing the ceramics there and the quality of it and the character of it has always been exciting to me, including, we talked just the other day, Garth and I, about Arnie Zimmerman's like 8-foot tall or 10-foot tall sculptural vase forms that sat outside in the plaza at the Everson. The Everson was also I.M. Pei's first museum design. He lived long enough, and it made me feel so good. He got there to the 50th anniversary celebration of that building. It's a magnificent museum in Syracuse, New York, and I would encourage anybody in the area or region to go. Garth is a writer, curator, and educator. Also a funny guy. I actually like his sense of humor a lot. I don't know how, maybe it'll be on display a little tonight. He is the Paul Phillips and Sharon Sullivan Curator of Ceramics at the Everson Museum. And they had been without a curator of ceramics for a considerable period. And this position has been created. And I'm excited that Garth was able to move there from Arizona State, where they have a marvelous collection at the museum. He's a self-described craft activist, which I really like, because if you go back and you research him and find some of his blogs, there's some really bold, youthful exuberance in some of it that I really love. He explores craft's influence and relevance in our century. This 21st century, figuring out how mud belongs and what we do with it and how it relates to culture is important. His research interests range from 1960s and 70s artist-led movements in the field of ceramics, but also the intersection of clay, video, and performance art. And that's very fascinating how clay as a physical and manual process has become a conceptual process in many ways too. His recent exhibitions at the Everson include The Floating Bridge, Postmodern and Contemporary Japanese Ceramics, Renegades and Reformers, American Art Pottery, Earth Piece, Conceptual and Performative Works in Clay. His writing has been published nationally and internationally with contributions to the books Reposition Paolo Soleri, The City is Nature. And I have, I think, 4 big Soleri bells at home that have traveled with me for decades, and I just love them. And then Victor Sikansky, The Gardener's Universe. And I want to add, and he also is a major essayist for Form and Fire, American Studio Ceramics from the E. John Bullard Collection. Tonight, Garth is going to share with us a dialogue about the Everson Museum of Art's renowned ceramic national exhibitions, which ran from 1932 to 74, and in many ways set the tone for the achievement of American ceramics during that period and beyond. And he's going to talk about that collection, but also related to Mr. Bullard's task of assembling his notable ceramics collection. With that, I will introduce or welcome Garth to give his talk on how I learned to stop worrying and love brown pots. Garth, all yours now. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Means a lot to be talking to you via the internet. I wish I was visiting in person, although I understand that there is a storm barreling toward you. And my first visit to Baton Rouge, when I came out of the clouds, I saw all of this blue down below, and I was like, oh, are those swimming pools? And then I realized that no, they were tarps, and they were the devastation of a recent hurricane. So I have seen nature's wrath in your neck of the woods, but I'm going to be sending positivity your way. So it was an incredible honor to be able to write for this catalog. And in a lot of ways, what I'm going to be talking about is kind of mirror the things that I wrote and the structure of some of what I wrote. But first, a housekeeping thing. I want to encourage everybody to use the chat feature. You can do crosstalk, you can heckle via the chat. Mostly, if you want to submit questions, you can submit questions via the chat. And to butter you up a little bit, I'm going to give away a very special and very exclusive prize. And it's something that you are going to want. And so to win this prize, you have to use the chat. And in the chat, in 1 or 2 sentences, I would like you to tell me about a piece of ceramics that you purchased over the summer. And I'll let you define that a little bit broadly. Our jury is going to be Mr. Daniel Stetson, who is going to pick out the winning entry. So be effusive, be creative, try to channel my spirit as I'm talking, and tell me about something awesome in ceramics.
Let me
that
just
you
say,
shot over the summer.
with apologies, I have to say, Mr. Bullard is not eligible for this. He has bought way too many this summer, and I'm proud of him and I'm happy
Yep.
about them. Yeah.
You're cut off. Yeah, Bill Paul, you're on notice too. All right. So use the chat feature to tell us about your wonderful acquisitions. And I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And we are going to declare our winner in about 15 minutes or 10 minutes into our talk. All right. Go back to the beginning here. All right, I apologize. I had two keynotes up at one time. All right. So as is my habit, I'm going to take probably the first 10 minutes of our chat together to brag about the Everson Museum. It's a little bit gauche, I think, when you are invited by another institution as amazing as LSU to just talk about yourself. But there's a method to my madness here. And one of the things that I'm really going to talk about is a parallel between my journey and John Bullard's journey as a collector, and also the Everson as something of a model for his collecting. So I promise that I will bring some of these threads together. Daniel, thank you so much for bragging on Syracuse. I'm gonna give you 3 reasons to love the Everson, and Daniel's already kind of touched on 2 of the 3. So I'm not gonna linger too much on a few of those, but the first reason is the building itself. And here's a picture of our building. I will say, truth in advertising, although this maybe looks really good to a lot of you in the midst of a Louisiana summer, or in the dog days of the Louisiana summer, but this is a common view of the Everson in December, January, February, March, April. We've got a wonderful Henry Moore sculpture that was selected by IMPay that is out front, that accumulates snow in marvelous ways. But the building was IMPay's very first museum building. And when he passed away several years ago, the New York Times did a list of his 5 most influential buildings. And I was so happy that the Everson was among them. So lots of the stylistic elements that IMPay would continue throughout his career, he solidified via the Everson. Mainly, the form and the function follow each other. There are 4 upstairs galleries that cantilever beautifully out into space. And IMPay really meant for this museum to be a sculpture for art. And he really thought of the building as a sculptural mass. And you really get a sense of that when you come to visit. It is made out of cast concrete, but IMPay had some really amazing touches that I'm going to talk about that make the building a special building when it comes to sort of the brutalist oeuvre. Let's see. One of the things that we do with our building is that we use it outwardly to share with the community. We partner with Syracuse University, and a group in Syracuse University called Lightwork commissions works from living video artists, and they are then projected onto the side of the Everson's building. And that happens every weekend throughout the calendar year. This is the interior sculpture garden of the Everson, and in many ways, the spiral staircase plays a starring role. It's amazing to bring in engineers and architects and to think about how this thing was conceptualized in an age where it was just drafting in Bezier curves. It's truly an amazing marvel of architecture. But the concrete is one of the things that is special about the Everson. I bring up this picture not just to pay tribute to Paul J. Catrich, who's an amazing contemporary art potter, but I wanted you to get a look at the concrete behind him. So every bit, or almost every bit, of the concrete in the Everson, inside and outside of the building, bears this amazing 45-degree pattern. And the 45-degree pattern reveals something beautiful about the concrete, which is IMPE selected a local granite quarry and selected a pink granite that got put into the aggregate of the concrete. And that granite aggregate is exposed through a very, very painstaking manual process. And that manual process is called bush hammering. So here you see, back in 1967, a worker outside of the Everson Museum. And again, every bit of the museum, inside and outside, we set up 45-degree steel jigs. And this poor bastard, with a gigantic pneumatic jackhammer, had to texture the building, which chips away and chisels and reveals this beautiful texture that makes up the building. So materiality is a huge buzzword when it comes to ceramics right now, but materiality is something I think that was always a part of IMPE's architectural practice. And even if you don't think that you are a fan of brutalist architecture, I welcome you to come open yourself to the architecture at the Everson. And because of all of the painstaking work that went into it, I'm trying to coin and popularize the term artisanal brutalism. So keep that in mind, and I'm going to bring in artisanal brutalism in just a minute. The second reason why you should love the Everson is that we are a museum of firsts. We were the first museum in the United States to declare that we only collect American art. Ceramics are an exception. The ceramics collection is global and it is encyclopedic, but declaring in 1911 that we focused on American art let the Everson carve out its own path. We were the first museum in the United States to start a docent program. One of the important ones is that we were the first museum in the United States to collect video art. And we had a full-time video collector in 1971, a decade before MoMA acquired their first piece of video art. And that curator was David Ross, who went on to be the director of the Whitney and the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. So this is a pioneering early incarnation of Nam June Paik performing with Charlotte Moorman on the video cello in 1972. The Everson also has an incredible history of putting on first exhibitions for notable artists. And one of the most notable was our 1971 exhibition for Yoko Ono. It was her first museum solo exhibition. Her guest artist was a guy named John Lennon, and they came to Syracuse the week after he wrapped recording the Imagine album and spent the week in Syracuse, then flew out a group of their friends, which included Ringo and George Harrison, on a private jet for the opening of the exhibition. Marilyn Minter had her first solo exhibition at the Everson, Joan Mitchell, and Carrie Mae Weems, who lives here in Syracuse, had her first major museum exhibition here at the Everson. And so working with artists early in their career is something that we take pride in. And then the final reason is ceramics, what I'm here to talk to you about. And I wouldn't be here talking to you today if it weren't for the woman who is on the screen right now. This is Adelaide Alsop Robineau. And Mrs. Robineau was an incredible pioneering ceramic artist. And I'm going to be emphasizing this over and over again. And luckily, this is something that John has cooked very carefully into his collection. If you haven't stopped to consider that ceramics is a medium that in the United States was built and popularized by women. High degree of the sort of founding artists who created studio ceramics were women. Adelaide Robineau is one of them. Mary Louise McLaughlin in Cincinnati is another one. Susan Frackleton in Wisconsin. It's an incredible story. But Adelaide Robineau can really be singled out among all of those other artists that I just mentioned. she grew up in a family that didn't have a lot of money. She learned China painting, and she learned to teach China painting to support herself and to support her family. She became very adept at it, but she was a quester. She was someone who wanted to control every facet of her medium, including making the vessels. And this was a time period in the late 19th century and early 20th century where it was not proper for a woman to sit behind the potter's wheel and throw pots. It was fine if you wanted to paint some dainty flowers on some pieces of china. But Adelaide Robineau had an absolute thirst for learning to make her own porcelains. And she was particularly inspired by French studio porcelain and the French studio porcelain movement. So one thing that might blow people's mind is that you couldn't just walk down to your local clay supply store and get porcelain. It was a material that only existed in factories. So Adelaide Robineau wrote to a very, very influential French artist, a man named Taxil Doat, and he kindly provided his formula for porcelain. So Robineau not only had to translate that formula from French, she had to source American materials, including a kaolin that she found in Texas. She had to test and formulate her own clay body. And she was largely self-taught when it came to making her pottery. And I'm about to talk about the Scarab Base, which is an incredible piece of hers, the most famous piece of American studio pottery. And it was created in 1910, which is only 9 years after the very first pot that she made by hand. I've been making pots for more than 25 years, and I can't imagine an achievement as great as Robineau's. So here she is making it. She actually made it in St. Louis rather than Syracuse. She was a faculty member for the People's University, which was an educational experiment in St. Louis in 1909, 1910, 1911. She was surrounded by male faculty at the People's University. Those male faculty got more resources and more attention, and so Adelaide Robineau made the Scarab Base at a time that she was a little bit sort of abused and ignored in the studio. In fact, she was surrounded by French studio workers, and she often had to translate for them on top of all of her other jobs, which included motherhood and raising a family at the time. So the Scarab Base is about 18 inches tall. It is made out of porcelain, and one of the most notable things about the Scarab Base is that it took Robineau 1,000 hours to do the carving on the Scarab Base. So the piece was created. It's rather thick because it's carved deeply. And all of the carving on the Scarab Base was done when the piece was absolutely bone dry. So she used fine knitting needles, she used dental tools, and she had to gradually abrade away the ceramics, just like an archaeologist digging up something very important. And she could do an area about the size of a nickel in an entire day of working. After 1,000 hours of carving the piece, she spent a week just glazing it. You'll notice here that she didn't just dunk the glaze in a bucket of glaze. All of the glaze is hand applied to accentuate the carving on it. Here are a couple of images that you get to be rare people who get to actually see this. Number one, you can see the translucency and how thinly carved the Scarab Base is on these areas of cartouche in particular. And the second is a lesson, and that is that after 1,000 hours of carving and a week of glazing, Adelaide Robineau puts this piece in the kiln. When it comes out, there's a crack on the bottom of the Scarab Base, about 1.5 inches long. She probably did freak out, but she didn't break it and throw a fit. Instead, she took pre-fired porcelain powder, packed it into the crack, and was able to fire it several times. And you can't see any trace of the repair to the Scarab Base on the outside now. But if you look carefully on the right, you can see traces of that cracking on the bottom of the Scarab Base. So there's your little lesson in resilience. One final thing about the Scarab Base is that a scarab is, of course, a dung beetle. And if you look closely, all of the scarabs are pushing their little balls of dung. And Adelaide Robineau identified with the scarab as a worker. And so in fact, this piece is called Apotheosis of the Toiler. So Adelaide Robineau identified with the Scarab Base, always pushing the ball of poop around. And something that I am the only decorative arts curator who's going to tell you this, the finial on the top, the ball on the top of the Scarab Base is undeniably the ball of poop that all of the scarabs are converging upon. So there's your little art history lesson. She sent it off to Turin, which was the world's largest design fair, and it was given the top awards in design in the field of ceramics. And it was the first time that an American, much less an American woman, had taken that top honor. And this is what paved the way for all American ceramists to be able to work on a world stage. All right, Daniel, are you ready to pick our winner? Because the prize, hot off the press, is an Everson enameled Scarab Vase pin. And this thing is so incredibly detailed. We worked with a talented artist in Portland to do this, and we sold out of our first pressing, and this is the very first piece from our second pressing, and I am going to give it away. Have you selected an impressive story and piece that stands out to you?
This story I like. I don't know the piece necessarily, but I think I do. But I really like this one. Was bought from a raffle ticket from the Watershed for the Ceramic Arts annual summer fundraiser, Salad Days.
Great.
Newcastle made. It was a raffle. It was live on Facebook, watching while working in my studio in Iowa. When I won the Rain Harris Paul Donnelly Cup, I was so excited. I was jumping up and down and yelling, "Yes, yes, yes." Too bad no one could hear me. There's some impressive work in there. I see Tom Butler bought himself a Robert Turner. That's pretty nice. His story was good too. But I love that this was not only buying ceramics, but also supported one of the great ceramic places in the country with the Watershed in Maine.
All right, so our winner, please send a direct message to Daniel with your address. Daniel will write it down, and I will send it off for your peacocking and display over the summer. So
it's Joanne Schnabel.
Joanne, hi Joanne, I'm so happy to be able to send this to you. All right, so I'm going to move forward and just talk in parallel about the Ceramic Nationals, which is where the Everson's collection and John Bullard's collection fully overlap. And Daniel paved the way a little bit to talk about the Ceramic Nationals, but the Ceramic Nationals were created in memory of Adelaide Robineau, who died in 1929. And a little known fact about Adelaide Robineau is that she actually died of a horrifying cancer while she was exploring uranium glazes. We don't know for sure that there was a link between her cancer and her use of uranium, but the way that materials were handled and people approached uranium at the time, it certainly didn't help. Her eternal ashes are actually in a vase that she designed at the Everson and are an accessioned part of the Everson's collection. So top that, John Bullard. I think you need to think about maybe someone's ashes that you can have accessioned by the LSU Art Museum as a part of this gift as well. Daniel's registrar is cringing right now in the background. But in Adelaide Robineau's memory, our longest serving museum director, who was a woman, very strong-willed, incredible woman named Anna Wetherill Olmsted. Olmsted coined the Ceramic Nationals in 1932 in tribute to Adelaide Robineau, and really envisioned them as the first great American competition, juried competition among American ceramic artists. And from the very beginning, it took off. By the second year, artists from across the United States really fought with each other to send their biggest and best pieces, their most memorable, incredible pieces to the Everson. Something mind-blowing is all of those pieces were juried in person. So there were regional jurying areas. The artists sent the pieces to regional juries who then sent them on to the Everson. And then the jury at the Everson would judge the entries, give them awards, including purchase awards where they came into the Everson's collection, But the incredible thing about the Everson and the thing about Anna Olmsted being a force of nature is that they sent these exhibitions after they were done at the Everson onto a circuit of exhibitions. And every great American museum participated in these exhibitions. This was one of the prime ways that the American public encountered ceramics. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Philadelphia Art Museum, the De Young Museum in San Francisco, the High Museum in Atlanta, on and on and on, the San Francisco Museum of Fine Art. All of these places regularly took the ceramic nationals and happily showed them. So this was, not just within an insular ceramic community, but this was something that museum and museum curators across the United States took notice of. It was an incredible vehicle for the popularization of ceramic art in the United States. I really can't overstate that fact. The founding of the Ceramic Nationals in 1932 really intersect with the time period where ceramic sculpture actually becomes a discipline within art. Up until that point, ceramics was a transitory material. Studies for pieces that would later be made in bronze, but artists like Wayland Gregory started making monumental work that started and ended in clay. And so the Everson was capturing that energy from the very beginning. And this is an image of the very first Ceramic National. You can see a little bit of sculpture, but largely the Ceramic Nationals were associated with mid-century vessels and vessel making. They helped launch the career of nearly every ceramic artist who got their start from this time period that I'm going to share with you during this exhibition or during this talk. This is a charming handwritten, hand-typed note from Anna Olmsted that exists in the Everson's file, telling the story of the Ceramic Nationals. And they had pretty humble origins. And one of the things that was humble about the origins of the Nationals is that there was someone on the Everson's board who owned a casket company, and they would loan the crates that the caskets came on. They would drape them with sateen cloth, and they would put the pieces up on those. So those are the humble displays, origins of our display. Over the years, the Ceramic National gained quite a few prominent sponsors, including IBM. Syracuse, China was a major sponsor here in Syracuse, one of the great dinnerware manufacturers in the country. So you can see the evolution by the 5th and 6th Ceramic Nationals here. Eventually, our location, which is different from our location now, got better display cases and more elaborate exhibition spaces. It traveled internationally. It traveled to Denmark. It traveled to Norway. There were several cases when the Ceramic Nationals became internationals. So hopefully you can move your grouping of people over so that you can see the display on the right. Look at this. This is something that I desperately want in our museum, a reflecting pool and being able to display vessels like over a water feature. Eventually, Flights of Fancy just completely took over when it came to the designers who designed the Ceramic Nationals. The Ceramic Nationals came to a close in 1972, and they were in some ways a victim of their own success. So from the early 1960s onward, you can see the evolution of funk ceramics and large-scale ceramic sculptures, and it no longer became practical to be able to gather all of the pieces in person. It became cost prohibitive. Shipping the pieces across the country became cost prohibitive because artists like June Kaneko, who's shown here on the upper left, and the Everson was the first museum to acquire a June Kaneko piece when he was an undergrad in college, in fact. Also, I think the field also became a little bit too heterogeneous for its own good. It's impossible to jury a piece of, I don't know, excrement referencing funk art to a tight classical vessel. So in 1972, the jury at the time, which included Robert Turner, who has a relative, hi Breer, on the call today, he was one of the last three jurors, which also included Peter Volkos, and they absolutely said that they couldn't judge the Ceramic Nationals from the 5,000 slides that they were given. It's a complicated story, but the Ceramic Nationals really came to a screeching halt right then and there, and the Everson sought new ways to make our mark. One of the people who helped make that mark is Ron Kukta. He was our director for 20 years, and he just passed away last year, and his presence is sorely missed. He was one of the editors of American Ceramics magazine, which is also one of the reasons why I'm sitting here today. And here he is, in fact, posing with Adelaide Robineau's funerary vase. That long, tall vase is what Adelaide Robineau, she called her cremation her last firing. There's that signature humor, Daniel, but that came from Adelaide Robineau. Another influential figure is Margie Hutto, who still lives and works here in Syracuse. She held my position in the early 1970s, and she created an influential series of exhibitions called New Works in Clay. And with New Works in Clay, artists like Helen Frankenthaler and Sir Anthony Caro, Billy Al Bankston came to Syracuse and did a body of work in clay. And now crossing over from sort of fine art into clay is a common experience, but I'm happy to say that the Everson was a pioneer of working that way. Clement Greenberg would just drop by and have a beer and check out to see who was in the studio. Here's Helen Frankenthaler, look at that. So everyone who feels like you have a sense of style in the studio, bow to Helen Frankenthaler and her hoodie in the studio. Incredible. Another monumental exhibition was A Century of Ceramics in the United States, the first exhibition to really trace the evolution of American ceramics. The book that accompanied it with it by Garth Clark and Margie Hutto was the first textbook and history book on the field of American ceramics. It had repressings and really had a lot to do with the shaping of our field. Here's a picture of baby Garth Clark in 1979 at the symposium for the exhibition, which is really a landmark intellectual exchange in the history of American ceramics. All right, so how long do I have to talk? 20 minutes about John Bullard's collection, but I promise you that there's dovetailing here. Very briefly, I'm going to say that I have not always been a lover of brown pots. In fact, I am a practitioner of the dainty arts. I hold an MFA in ceramics. I actually went to college in the same class with Professor Andy Shaw from LSU. We both made it across the finish line together. But I'm a China painter. I love color. I work with digital arts when I'm working in the studio. And so I created a somewhat tongue-in-cheek organization called the Pottery Liberation Front. And we had such radical slogans as, if it's brown, flush it down, which I completely recant to this day. My journey with brown pottery really dates to the time of the first time that I crossed paths with E. John Bullard. And I'm not going to go into John's bio. Most of you know it, longtime director at the New Orleans Museum of Art. But it's not touted quite often enough that John only started collecting ceramics in a serious way 6 years ago. So the 1,000+ pieces that he's amassed really have come in the last 6 years. So hats off to an even sort of bigger element of what he's done. In the essay that I wrote for Form and Fire, I encourage everybody to pick up a copy of this catalog. I struggled for how I was going to really talk about John's collection. And one of the conclusions that I reached is that over the course of 6 years, John has really amassed his own Ceramic National collection. It parallels the Ceramic National, but John is not a slave to name. So he wasn't using the Ceramic Nationals as a roadmap. And there are pieces by artists who may have participated in the Nationals but didn't necessarily win purchase awards that John is a fervent supporter of. So he came out to Arizona State. We spent a day looking through the incredible archives, which include the archives of Studio Potter magazine, but looking at pots. And in my 3 years at Arizona State, I truly fell in love with the history of mid-century pottery, and developed a lot of my own artists that I'm passionate about. I learned things through Studio Potter and the ASU collection, in particular about influential female artists that I will talk about, artists of color. And one of my takeaways is that ceramics is not a safe field and a safe bet. It has always been home to outsiders. It has always been a home to outside the box thinkers. Ceramics has more people of color who have participated in it than you think. Certainly more LGBTQ plus artists than you think. We can always build a broader, more inclusive field of ceramics. But part of my mission in ceramics as a curator is to pay tribute to those artists who blazed a trail for those of us who are not like the others in the field. Here's an image of ASU and their incredible archives. So the Everson is an incredible place through the Ceramic Nationals to come study the history of brown pots. And this piece behind the Scarab Base, which is always out on view, is the most requested piece for viewing in our entire collection. This is probably the most cult appreciated pot in the history of Potter's favorite pots. And this is a cookie jar by Arthur Baggs, who taught at Ohio State University. And this is the very picture of generosity when it comes to the field of ceramics. It has this swelling form, the lugs on the side, the finial on the top. Every curve, every part of this pot relates to every other pot. And every element of this pot is rewarding you with its generosity, and is something that I love to bring out as much as possible. This is one of the most monumentally important brown pots in the Everson's collection. 1951, Karen Carnes, and she created this on a trip to Italy. And she was speaking to Italian architects like Gio Ponti and dipping her feet into avant-garde ceramics in Italy. And this was a time period that she began to be exposed to Black Mountain College and, again, Robert Turner. Marguerite Wildenhain, someone who's central to John Bullard's collection. This is one of her first pieces to gain attention in the Ceramic Nationals, this tea set from 1946. Relating to that, in 1947, Minnie Nigoro, an artist who throughout World War II, she's Japanese-American, she was put into an internship camp. She, through divine intervention, met Daniel Rhodes, an Alfred professor, who saw in her sort of incredible potential and taught her ceramics. And 2 years after World War II and getting out of an internment camp, took some of the highest awards in the Ceramic Nationals. Brown pots. So these pots are all from John Bullard's collection. We, of course, have to pay tribute to Frances Senska. So she was a World War II vet and served in the WACS during World War II. And she was the influential teacher of many ceramic artists, including Peter Volkos, who then came to dominate the Ceramic Nationals in the 1950s. Montana clay is a deep strain that runs through John Bullard's collection, and one that I've actually kind of glossed over and left out because I can't go through every part of his collection. This is sort of careening through time and space, but Linda Christensen and Minnesota potters are another bedrock element of his collection. And Linda Christensen's wood-fired work is solid and sensitive and reflects her incredibly inquisitive nature. She does video art with her iPhone of herself careening down ski hills and does wild installation pieces on her rural property in Minnesota and embodies the sort of devil-may-care experimental spirit of ceramics. Karen Carnes, we've already mentioned, and I showed that great piece from the Everson's collection, but has a range of pieces in John Bullard's collection, ranging from early functional stoneware to her incredible sensitive salt-fired, more avant-garde pieces. One of the things that I love about John's collection, and John is someone, if you've ever gotten to meet him, he has a puckish personality and he has humor, and he can come across as slightly formal at first, but that begins to melt away very quickly. And so a mirror in his collection is his deep love for the Michigan potter John Glick. And I especially love that John has given a variety of pieces to LSU, but he's given some really strange pieces. And John Glick is someone who took incredible risks with his brushwork, but there was in particular a period during the 1970s that his forms became sort of more experimental and far out. And this is right in the pocket of John Bullard's happy place when it comes to John Glick. Toast Mickey Mouse, Japanese glazed Nirvana. David Mcdonald is an artist who is near and dear to Syracuse, someone that Daniel Stetson will attest to. One of our greatest African-American potters, one of our greatest potters, period. He started teaching at Syracuse University in 1971. And throughout his career, he's really worked to highlight his own African heritage and the visual elements that can be translated from African headdresses, hair, costumes, agriculture, into the pots that he makes. And this is a series of calabash-inspired vessels that come from African ritual vessels. Not the greatest photo, but another Minnesota potter, Randy Johnson, and his incredible wood-fired pots. So who could fail to be moved by these incredible high wire acts of brown pottery that stir the soul and interact with food in meaningful ways? I think the last image of a brown pot that I have here is this incredible gourd-inspired base that goes along with David McDonald's piece by the North Carolina potter, Bruce Golson. And North Carolina, of course, being an incredibly potent pottery area to study. And so I love that this is inspired in a lot of ways by Chinese gourd bases, but it is elongated and stretched in this incredible way. And it's a monumental size as well. One last, Don writes, just like John Glick, had a very Baroque time period in the 1970s where his brown pots got very expressive and decorative in a certain way. And I'm so glad to see that these are pieces that resonate with John and his collection. All right, just going to mention two institutions very quickly that are primal when it comes to the field of ceramics. And the first is Alfred, my alma mater, Andy Shaw's alma mater of many people who are on this call. And John Bullard, through his collection, has sought to reflect the work of artists throughout Alfred's history. Robert Turner with his history at Black Mountain College and the ceramic avant-garde can't be overstated. I knew Robert when I was at Alfred and got to spend a decent amount of time with him and was an incredible, influential educator. Daniel Rhodes, who I already mentioned when it came to the education of Minnie Nagoro. And again, John has really sought to not only capture a range of these artists' work, but has donated a range of their work to LSU that reflects this. So I am jealous of this collection in that educators can come in and really use this collection as a teaching collection. And I tried to capture some of that potency in my essay. Val Cushing is an artist who had left Alfred and retired right as I was coming on. And He's known for his very sensitive vessels with incredible balance between all of the elements. He embodies the Alfred vessel tradition. But once again, John takes a walk on the wild side and has this violet, sort of fanciful piece of Val's that I think reflects a side that not everybody always saw of his. Wayne Higby, currently the director of Alfred's incredible ceramic museum. Andrea Gill, an artist that doesn't get linked enough with the pattern and decoration movement. And of course, there's an important exhibition of the pattern and decoration movement that just opened at Bullard College in the Hudson Valley. And Andrea Gill is someone who is definitely a part of this conversation. Her husband, John Gill, who just retired, featured in the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Shapes from Out of Nowhere exhibition, which is still on view. Linda Sikora, one of my professors, well represented in John's collection. But perhaps the most striking Alfred professor in John's collection, and he's someone who for some reason, I think he's got over a dozen pieces, but Ted Randall is incredibly well represented in John Bullard's collection. And I like to think that that's because of his expressive range. So he worked in a vessel idiom throughout his career. This is a tall, sort of monumental vase, incredibly beautiful from a functional point of view. But he's especially known for these ritual vessels that are inspired by Shang Dynasty bronzes. They have this incredible historical gravitas to them. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the outliers. And that's something that I love and respect about John Bullard's collection, is that he has respect for the outliers. And he is not necessarily looking for the trophy piece that sums up all pieces from that artist. But we share this in our DNA, that he is looking for pieces that express the marginalia and express the wildest creative impulses, which with Ted Randall go back to sort of conceptual elements. And this explosion of work with Ted Randall came right after his retirement from teaching. He was suddenly able to get back into the studio. And so LSU has one of the most potent collections of an artist that I admire for his incredible experimental edge and his ability to sort of walk on that edge. The next institution that I'm just going to talk about briefly, because it has lots of artists that are represented in it, Kansas City Art Institute. So this is an undergraduate institute. I married a Kansas City Art Institute graduate. John and Andrea Gill that I just mentioned came out of the Kansas City Art Institute. And the legendary professor there is an artist named Ken Ferguson. This is sort of his last great historical form. Pieces called slump vases, and they start to sort of grow in scale to be monumental. He was also making pieces that had sculptural rabbits on them at the time. But he's actually giving sort of gravity to these pieces, and you're getting to see the material melding and slumping down from gravity. He had a soda kiln, I believe, that he had fired so many times that he could just put pieces in it with no glaze on the outside, and there was enough residual soda in the kiln to glaze the pieces. Akio Takamori, who just passed away 3 years ago from pancreatic cancer, one of the most legendary artists that came from Kansas City, Japanese, was recruited by Ken Ferguson and went to Alfred after Kansas City, and wound up being a longtime teacher at the Kansas City Art or at the University of Washington. Kurt Weiser, I'm not going to talk about him in depth because he just had an amazing talk and visit. But this is a grouping of pieces that he made while at the Archie Bray Foundation in Montana. So another connection to Kansas City, Montana, and now he's at Arizona State. I'm just going to breeze through these. California, gets a lot of press when it comes to its innovations in ceramics. Volkos, of course, was working in ceramics at the time that he sort of had his breakthrough. Laura Andreessen, incredible pioneering artist. She was a sort of groundbreaking, out to anybody who knew her, lesbian artist with a longtime partner. And she was part of the lesbian artistic demimonde of Los Angeles. She was a close friend of Imogene Cunningham, who took a series of stunning portraits of her in her studio. Gertrude and Otto Natzler, their importance as educators and influential artists and glaze technicians can't be overstated. But again, I want to underscore that John Bullard is not going after just a handful of signature names. If they're an underappreciated artist that he wants to promote, Joel Edwards is not mentioned nearly enough, and he was an early student of Volkos at Otis, and his career parallels the mid-century vessel movement in ceramics. And so it's incredible that these two pieces from the 1960s, I think, are incredible representations of this movement, and I'm so happy to see them on display. Paul Soldner, who taught at Scripps Institute in Claremont for many, many years, and was a groundbreaking and very bohemian artist, often footprints from walking on and sort of wedging the clay. And it's great that John is stepping away from the vessel in many ways, and Richard Shaw is an artist that can't be denied when it comes to that art. Very quickly, this is my last section before I have one last thing to sign off on. In his collecting, and it's, again, hard to believe that this is only 6 years with John, but his collection is beginning to stretch forward in time from the 1945 to 1990 period that he initially set into contemporary ceramics. But there are also other incredible outliers. Eric Gronberg, this piece is from 1968, and he was an artist who was sort of out of time and unto himself, and an early artist who used printmaking techniques and pop art and pressing imagery onto his pieces in an incredibly potent way. Plus, look at these groovy, amazing 60s colors. Fast forward to 2015, Bill Grillard, who's had a 50-year or 40-year period and teaches and is taught for a long time at the Cleveland Institute of Art, which is another amazing institution that has birthed many incredible artists. Lisa Orr, with her vibrant colors and echoes of Mexican slipware and English slip trailing. So happy that you've had to have interactions with her. This piece from Melissa Green is a marvel, and I'm happy that this is an incredible outlier. I love that there's a mini narrative here with these wolves sort of peeking through this veil of birch trees. This might be my last pot, like a brown pot that isn't brown. Tom Turner is an incredible innovator when it comes to late 20th century and 21st century glazing, and these oil spotted pieces, I think, are the very pinnacle of the potter's art. I just paid him a visit in Illinois, and it was one of the happiest studio visits that I've ever had. So bravo, John. All right, the thing that I'm going to end with, I'm going to return the attention to me now before we have time for a few questions. But the Everson is embarking on a project that is foolhardy and quixotic and something that no museum has ever tackled, to my knowledge. And it all revolves around functional ceramics. So there is a woman, a collector from Dallas, Texas, named Louise Rosenfield. She is the patron of many, many people on this call. She is the most voracious contemporary functional pottery collector. If you can't put a flower in it or serve food on it, it's out of bounds for her, and she only collects living artists. Louise has always said that rather than having her collection go to a museum, she would rather have her collection go to a restaurant where the restaurant can use the pieces until every last piece is broken. And maybe that last piece could go in a museum somewhere. The Everson is doing the restaurant one better. And we're working with an internationally known design firm called Millions to carve out a distinctive space within our IMK design building. And we are building a restaurant and working with Syracuse's best farm-to-table restaurant to create a restaurant where all of the food is served on functional ceramics. You can come during the day and have a cup of coffee out of a Warren Mackenzie coffee mug. You can use Karen Carnes pots, and things will get chipped and they will be broken. But this is in the spirit of the artists, and I would like to think that very much in the spirit of something that A. John Bullard would love to see happen. So I invite everybody. The Everson's Cafe, which by the way is named Louise, is going to be opening in November of 2021. So I invite you to take that road trip to Syracuse, snow or no, and I can promise you great ceramics, great food, and great experiences that are in the vein of the man who we are honoring today, Mr. John Bullard. So thank you, everybody. Congratulations, Joanne. We're sort of right up on an hour, but do we have some time to take a few questions, Daniel?
Yes, I would encourage some folks if they have them. I know that I saw maybe Sarah or Clark, you saw, and I know there's at least one in there that was asked during his talk. Trying to find it.
Leslie asked, was she of the Olmsted Garden Designers? I think that's referring to Robino.
So no, Anna Wetherill Olmsted was the longtime director of the Everson, which by the way, other than one male curator, the Everson's leadership team is all female today. And that's very much in keeping with the Everson's past. So Anna Wetherill Olmsted was the Everson's director for 29 years, I believe. And she's not related to the master landscaper, Friedrich Law Olmsted, is that it? Slight variation in the spelling of her name. And she didn't really come from society or limitless money. But she was really the person who put the Everson on the map nationally.
Garth, I have a question for you. Has there been any thought about the Everson doing something like Crystal Bridges for ceramics? They did the state of the art, where they brought artists from every state, and, not saying to recreate the national, but some form of a curated project that might give the scope of the current moment?
Yeah, I can promise you that something like that will be in the works. I think that, I've made a conscious choice not to sort of bring back a juried sort of ceramic national. There are other people that do that amazingly. San Angelo, like Zanesville, more power to you. Western Carolina University has done a series of really incredible surveys of the field, but yeah, I'm very, very interested in contemporary energy, and we will be doing kind of a coffee table book and a traveling exhibition that will be a history of the ceramic nationals, and we're working on a permanent display. But I think to balance that out, we are constantly working with contemporary artists and getting into incredible, crazy projects with them. And that's something that, I think we're going to want to bring back on a large scale as well.
Make sure you keep us in mind for that tour. I don't know if we can if we're big enough or can deal with it. Boy, it sounds fun.
It is so hard to tour ceramics, and we're hoping that the Raymond Alozua exhibition, he's another artist featured in the Form and Fire exhibition, that we're looking to travel that one as well.
Interesting. We are a little past the hour now, and I didn't know, I don't see there's, anybody have a question? You can unmute and ask your question, or you can put it in the chat.
There was another question asking, are there any online resources that can be accessed to see or study the various works shown over time at the Ceramics Nationals?
Okay, so thank you very much for that question. And I am totally remiss. I actually somehow took a slide out that usually plays up that aspect of the Everson. So I have to say that the Everson, right before I came on board, the Everson did a massive digitization project. And it's a little bit hidden on our website, but the Everson has massive resources. You can access the catalogs from every ceramic national. You can access all of the images or images of all of the pieces that entered the Everson through the Ceramic National, and that's over 300 pieces. You can access correspondence between the artists and the Everson. The Luce Foundation helped us to do that. And if you go to our exhibitions, if you click on ceramics, you can find the ceramics archive within that.
I will say, Garth, for our sake too, the Bullard collection can be found in our collection on our website. So you can go there and look at what's currently exhibited or do the Bullard collection. And I think all of them that we have up to a point are already on there.
Fantastic. Yeah, and going forward, we're working on that permanent exhibition space for the Ceramic Nationals, and we will be doing kind of special online programming and scholarship to help contextualize the Ceramic Nationals. But do use the Everson's archives. Anyone here who's an educator or who's studying, or even if you just want to go down an incredible rabbit hole, please use that archive, and all of the images are freely used. I'll also say that the more than 3,000 pieces in Louise Rosenfield's collection are carefully cataloged as well, and you can go to www.rosenfieldcollection.com. And you can find the pieces that will eventually be making their way to the Everson for use in our restaurant.
Somebody asked specifically, like, if you come to that restaurant, will you be able to request to be served by with a Robert Turner cup or a Warren McKenzie? Or
we will have a selection of cups, probably 100 cups or something on view. You probably won't be able to say, dig deep in the archive, but you'll definitely be able to choose from a wide variety of cups, and there will be kind of historic cups included, doubtless.
Well, I want to thank you again. I want to say that Joanne Schnabel, who won the prize, who I don't really know, but the connections are amazing. She is a now retiring professor of ceramics at the University of Northern Iowa, where I worked and helped to build the gallery that's there. And this fall, she's having a retrospective show of her work and 22 alumni ceramicists together in that gallery. That's really small world.
Yeah, Joanne, I met her when I was a young student at University of Nebraska, and she was incredibly giving, and her studio visit and workshop made a huge impression on me. So congratulations on the retirement, well earned, Joanne, and I can't wait to learn more about the retrospective as well.
And Mel Buchanan says, great talk, Garth. Looking forward to spending time with the catalog. Well, if there are any more questions, I'm seeing a lot of thank yous and wonderful talk, Garth. I wanted to throw out a heckle, but you had me laughing too much. I would love to hear you talk about ceramics. Thank you for being a significant part of this project. That's from Andy Shaw. Andy, right. You should have heckled.
Yeah, go Tigers with the EAUX as well.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Anyways, this has been a wonderful evening, and I highly recommend the Everson Museum. If you get a chance between now and February 13th, our museum has regular hours, pending hurricane over this weekend. But we would welcome all of you to come for a visit. It's a special thing. I would like to mention the October issue of Ceramics Monthly is going to have at least 10 images of works from our show. So there's actually a little national coverage about to happen on it, which is really a great joy to see happening. So, all right. Have a great evening. Thank you, Garth. I'll be back in touch with you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.